us.
All of 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 us are lost.
All of us are lost. Lost.
Lost. Lost.
Hello and welcome to All of Us Are Lost, a rewatch podcast delving back into the island of the TV series Lost 20 years later. I am Kat, and joining me on this journey through the jungle is Andy. And today we are getting very close to the season 1 finale as we look at Deus Ex Machina and Do No Harm. Andy, were these episodes that stuck out to you before a rewatch? Because I know for myself that I was always very dialed into a John Locke episode, and we've got a John Locke episode first. What about yourself?
In terms of what kind of transpires over the two episodes, I can remember that fairly clearly. I thought there was the death that happens was by other means. I didn't remember a lot of the second episode, but and also the actual flashback stuff in this Locke heavy first episode. I didn't recall any of it. Terry O'Quinn with hair is just terrifying. I maybe must have just blacked it out and put it to the darkest regions of my mind. But yeah, overall, I remember bits and pieces as it kind of came to me, but it wasn't one that I could kind of accurately recall off the top of my head. You?
Remember that John Locke had a life. I mean, at some point in this episode, like Boone's talking to him, and he says, "You never really talk about yourself, John." And John's like, "Oh, my life's boring." And the more that we see of these flashbacks of John Locke, the more that is just a lie. So we've already found out in Walkabout that this man was paralyzed before he went on the island, and now in this episode, it's just tragedy after tragedy after tragedy for him. And I kind of get why he likes the island. The island isn't really trying to do anything to hurt him like his entire family and the world around him has been.
Yeah. He's a very tragic character, and as you said, he's very much leaning into his belief in the island in this episode as well. And as you said, you can understand that the island shows him a vision, a very grim vision that maybe you wouldn't follow on with if you weren't a kind of true believer. He is willing to put other people in danger because of his levels of belief as well. And that kind of makes him, I think, for the other people on the island, I think that makes him dangerous. Possibly the most worried I've been for other people due to John Locke's actions this whole series. We've mentioned him maybe recruiting for his own little army at times. But with this episode, and when he's been doing that recruiting, he's seemed helpful. He's given a bit of back and forth, like we've seen him making things for Claire. He's helped Charlie with his heroin addiction, but he seems very rational, if that's the right word to use in this episode. It's where it seems his goal is all that's important. The hatch is driving him crazy, and if he can't get into it, then, or if he wants to get into it and he's willing to do whatever it takes to get there.
Yeah, I think there's a really nice parallel between what John is doing on the island in this episode with Boone to the story that unfolds in John's past, wherein he meets his father, and I mean, we'll get into it a little bit later on, but his father kind of takes advantage of him to get something that he wants. And I kind of feel that's mirrored quite nicely with what John is doing on the island, which I think is a big indicator of where his morality has swung him to. He's so desperate now for this hatch that he is willing to, do whatever it takes and hurt whoever it might need to in order to achieve that goal.
Yeah, definitely. And then, we see it kind of opens with Boone and Locke using a trebuchet, I think they called it, to try and crack the hatch. And I think he says everything breaks if you apply the right force, which is, again, not a bad analogy for what people go through in this episode and what John's went through. Like, he's been broken, he's been built back up again on the island. And it was interesting. There was a scene in it, and it almost felt like when I was watching the flashback, because we've seen him now walking in this flashback, so we know there's a point where he becomes paralysed. He mentions it to Boone, actually, so he opens up to Boone actually quite a bit. He mentions how when he first came on the island, he was in a wheelchair, he was paralysed for 4 years, and he doesn't get into any more detail with it. But it was watching the flashbacks, it was almost like, if something was going to happen to John, like has a surgical procedure, he gets hit by a car. It reminded me of a Hot Tub Time Machine with Crispin Glover, when Crispin Glover's lost his arm and they went back in time. And so he's sitting going, maybe he gets hit with the car, maybe that's what's caused his paralysis, maybe post-operative complications cause the paralysis. We never get that answer in this episode, but it very much kind of called back to that for me. For some strange reason, I could just imagine Crispin Glover waving and everyone a deep inhale and a breath. But he's still the most intriguing character on this, and we do now, I feel anyway, understand his motives. We've spoke before about not knowing what he's doing, or we're not aware of what he's doing, but he seems certainly to be fully committed to what he wants. But now we've seen a bit more of him.
So in the past, we open with him. He's the assistant manager of a toy shop, which I guess explains why he can talk to Walt so well, because he's obviously worked around children for a number of years. Again, though, he's kind of talking inappropriately to children. I mean, he's explaining Mousetrap, which, yes, is a game that children can play, but there is just something a little off about how John is describing the setup of Mousetrap, which makes you kind of question if he should be alone with that child. But again, he randomly mentions a brother. Like we've heard before about a sister that he spoke to Kate and Sawyer about, but then we also know that he grew up in the foster care system. So I guess John just has a lot of brothers and sisters who potentially aren't his blood brothers and sisters, because it's kind of like this man, it's like, does he have all these family, or is he just forever telling a story to make that sale in the case of the kid?
Yeah.
And then we have his mother turn up, who I think is played by Swoosie Kurtz, and she said you got adopted, and that's when John says that he grew up in the foster system, and you kind of see her reaction and realize that that's not quite what she anticipated for him. And then she tells him what John has always wanted to hear, that he is special. So special, in fact, that he doesn't have a father, that he was immaculately conceived. So right here, we've already got John Locke being built up as being this special. I mean, I think he's with her until the point when she says, you've been immaculately conceived, because this is a John that's not quite a fully fledged believer in that sort of thing just yet.
No, he's and it does get sort of kiboshed very quickly. And I think it's the next flashback scene. He's hired a private investigator, make sure that she is his mum, and she is. But he also found out his father, Anthony Cooper, played by Kevin Teague. I don't know how to say that surname, but who an actor I recognise. I must have seen him in something, but it could have just been from this. And he gets the chance to meet his father. He starts to get that relationship that he's never had before, and again, we're seeing him maybe opening up a wee bit more. It seems that they're obviously the parents are estranged, but we're getting to see a side of John where he's looking for validation. He's looking from Anthony to treat him like the have that eternal relationship that he'd never been able to get before, and it kind of leaves him vulnerable, essentially.
And his dad teaches him how to hunt. We've all wondered how John Locke became a hunter, and it was through some father-son bonding. They went shooting, and they went on, like, there's references to other hunts that they've been on together whilst they are building this up. And you kind of think, oh, this is really nice. John, he's grown up in foster care. He doesn't know his parents. He's now getting to know his dad. But Dad is in need of a kidney. And
Mm.
John, being the, dutiful son, agrees to give Dad kidney. But Dad is so great. And see, the whole scene reminds me of this episode of The Simpsons where like Grandpa Simpson needs something from Homer. I think they're going to do some sort of operation, and Homer like skips out, and it just really
Yeah.
wrongly the whole episode, that whole scenario where John's going down for surgery reminded me of that. And we get this awful sequence where John then wakes up and his dad's gone. His dad has taken the kidney and run, which is just
Mm.
awful, because it's like I understand that this man hasn't raised John, but he has still got to know him, and to just be that focused on your own. I mean, I guess it's his mortality that he doesn't want to die from not being able to get a kidney transplant, but just to do that to another person, especially
Mm.
after having sort of lured them in with like, "Oh, son," I think it's really, really, really cruel.
Mm. Yeah, and the whole thing's been a setup as well. His mum Emily comes to visit him at the hospital and says, I was needing some money and he was giving me money, but you had to be willing to give him your kidney. You had to feel like you wanted him, to have it, or this wouldn't have worked. Um, so it wasn't just that. So he's just woke up from surgery, and then he gets the double blow of your mum was involved. Like, it's horrible for someone and he wouldn't have felt wanted by these people. They forced themselves back into his life to completely manipulate him, take advantage of him, and then dump him again. And it's it was interesting actually. Now I don't know how the foster system would work, but he has the same surname as his mum. Like, I didn't think that would have been a thing. I thought it would have been a case of that. I don't know, like given to the home and they would give you a name. I don't know. It was strange having the same surname. I just assumed they wouldn't have, but yeah, it must be. You can see how much it breaks him. I think Terry Quinn's great throughout this episode. He breaks down. He tries to go and find his. He goes to his dad's house, doesn't get allowed in, and then breaks down in the car on the way out, which leads to another scene of him breaking down in tears and in the sort of present day, if you will, and throughout. And we also have scenes where he back on the island, his legs are starting to fail him again. And I think again, Terry O'Quinn is just fantastic in those moments, showing his frustration, showing his anger, and showing his resilience as well, which you can see he's probably been built up through such a hard life.
Yes, you had this great scene where I think after the trebuchet has kind of shattered and has not worked, Boone's like, "John, your leg," and there's a bit of shrapnel in his leg, and he hasn't felt it, and that's kind of the first sign to John that, hang on a minute, what's happening? And then later on,
Mm.
he's stumbling as he's walking, and Boone's like, "Are you okay?" And Locke's like, "Yeah, oh, it's just my leg from earlier." And then Boone's like, "But that was the other leg." And then that's
Mm.
when, yeah, John kind of breaks out. He has this really weird sort of like David Lynchian vision dream sequence with a plane and Boone covered in blood. His mother
Mm.
stood with an umbrella or something, and then Boone's going on about Teresa going up the stairs, Teresa going down the stairs, and it's a very weird sequence. Even within Lost, it's like, what is
Mm.
going on? And then we have Locke break down to Boone, and as you said earlier, say that he was paralyzed, and the power of the island has brought him in, because Boone was kind of in with Locke a few weeks ago, but then I think he's got bored, as golden retrievers do.
Yeah.
It's fun playing fetch for a while, but then they want to go and do something else. So Boone's very much over the hatch, and John
Mm.
is insistent they continue. Starts trying to tell him all this magic mystical stuff, but Boone's not having it. But when he gets hit with the double whammy of John was paralyzed and the name dropping of Teresa, who we find out was like a nanny of Boone's that like had an accident, um,
Mm.
that's when Boone suddenly believes. And then they stumble across a plane, which will become very pivotal come series two,
Mm.
I think it is. Um,
Mhm.
but it also is quite pivotal in this episode as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so earlier they'd found a body as well, which had a sort of priest's outfit, garb, I don't know what you call it, costume. But the priest had a gun on him as well, so they're very apprehensive if he was a holy man. So on discovery of the plane, I think then, as you said, Boone's maybe a bit more understanding towards John's feelings towards it. But because of his legs having given way, Boone's the one that has to go up. He finds on that plane, he manages to find another dead body, which the body count's getting higher in this place, but mummified. So they've been there a while. They've came from Nigeria, which is some journey to be going if you've travelled from Nigeria past Oceania. And I mean, I don't know. A small plane, I don't think, could do that, but we'll find out more about that, I suppose. And he finds it's just loaded with heroin, all stuffed within Virgin Mary porcelain dolls. But I think another really intriguing part is Boone finds a radio that seems to be working as well, and he gets a response, which I had to put subtitles on for this. But when he says we are the survivors of 815, and the people reply in the line, no, we are the survivors of 815. So we have heard that the character of, I forget her name, who believes her husband was in the
Rose.
Rose, yeah, believed her husband survived and he was in the tail of the plane. Could it be him? Could it be these others that we've heard of, another part of Ethan, that are just messing with them? It's something that, again, another level of intrigue. And then the plane falls, and Boone is kind of gravely injured.
Yeah, when I also, I mean, I watch everything with subtitles, just force of habit from having a small child. You want to hear anything, you have to put the subtitles on, and even when she's not watching it, subtitles are on. And I had to watch that sequence with the radio a couple of times because initially I thought it was just like it was echoing back, like Boone
Mm,
was saying, "We're the survivors," and then I thought it was echoing back, but then I listened to it again, and it's very much not Ian Somerhalder's voice. It is somebody else, and it's then like, oh yeah, there were those other people in the other half of the plane who could be alive, and we are coming
mm.
towards the end of the series. You know, we might be leading somewhere where we might start to encounter some other people. Um, but it's just that plane being full of heroin. That's going to be fun for Charlie. You know, he's
Yeah.
what 2, 3 weeks into giving up heroin, and now he's got temptation. Just he's got a life supply of heroin. You know, if he falls off that wagon, there's just
Mm.
so many problems that this plane can throw up.
I think if I was stranded on an island and I wasn't a heroin addict and there was that much heroin, you'd just go for it. Why not? I mean, what else you do?
Yeah,
Just
I
get
mean,
high and get eaten by a
all you
polar bear.
know, yeah, I mean, all you know is that there's a woman that had a similar experience, and she's been trapped there for 16 years. It's like probably not going to get rescued,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
she might
yeah,
just go
yeah.
into
But that's
oblivion, you know?
why not? But yeah, that spells bad news for Charlie. Assuming he'll come across it at some point. Eh, the tempt, as you said, that I don't think you're ever. The thing they say with addicts is you're always an addict. You're never clean completely. So that's going to have a level of temptation, and everything traumatic wise that Charlie's been through, and there's no doubt more to come. Maybe that'll push him back over that edge if he does come across it. But it's yeah, the the idea that as well that John's pushed this and Boone is now on the brink, and it's suddenly once after the planes fell and Boone needs help and needs carried, suddenly his legs are working again. So he's pushed through with this. He's saw the kind of bloody image of Boone. He knows something bad. Well, you would think he knows bad's going to happen to Boone because he seems in tune with the island, but he pushed through with it anyway. Then the island obviously has been wanting that because it made sure that it wasn't him that went up. It made sure Boone was the one to go up. And the minute he's fine, the minute that Boone, sorry, has been hammered through this plane, John's suddenly working again, carries him through to try and get help from Jack, and it's it's then that, yeah, and Locke kind of abandons him as well. So he just gives him to Jack and goes, right, turns around, Jack turns around, Locke's gone. And where's he gone again? He's back at the hatch. He's just, the fact that, I mentioned earlier on that it kind of led in from the scene of him crying in the car to him breaking down outside the hatch. And he's not out of anything guilty. He doesn't feel anything for Boone, really. At this moment in time, he's just frustrated that he's done everything he's asked. He's essentially got someone killed, and the hatch still won't open for him, as if it was just going to magically pop open because what's happened to Boone. And then we get a light come on. So maybe that's him.
Yeah, that light comes on. I mean, I will say something that we have sort of skipped over with the whole Trebuchet thing is if they've been there for I think it's like 10 days, 2 weeks or something from what's mentioned, but they have
Mm,
dug very, very deep perimeter around that hatch, obviously like trying to find another route in. Like
mm,
that is some solid work for two people to do. Um,
mm,
but yeah, I think I remember the light in the hatch coming on as like the last image of series one. So I was very confused when it happened here.
same.
Um,
Mm,
but I was pleased it happened. But I mean, going back to what you were saying about like the sacrifice, it all ties nicely in with Yellow Jackets, which I've been rewatching recently, and this is teenage girls crash in a plane, and then they have to kind of survive on their own. And whilst they're there, they kind of adopt this religion about the wilderness and the wilderness uh,
mm,
choosing for somebody to die so that like the rest of them can benefit. And there's a really eerie parallels with that and then what's happened in this episode, because as you say, it's almost like the island is deliberately incapacitating Locke because the island still needs him, but Boone
mm,
maybe has run his course, and so he is offered up as sacrifice.
mm. Yeah, and it's the fact that Locke's been like the vessel for everything we've felt about the island, and all this. Most of the mystery has been through Locke. He seems to know something that nobody else does, but at the same time, it's still leading him down like a. It's the island is leading him down the garden path. He doesn't really know what's going on. He's letting pretty much himself again be manipulated the same way he did in his flashback with his mum and dad. And it shows that because he's now become this man of faith, as you said, maybe before, if he'd met his mum on the island and she said, no, you were immaculately conceived, he would have jumped on it right there and then and been, I 100% believe that. I am the second coming. And his, I think that's maybe shows his frustration at the hatch as well, because he's maybe feeling he's allowed himself to be led on for nothing again and he's been dumped. And it's probably going to affect his decision making going on in the future. And it's certainly going to have him at loggerheads with this kind of man of science and Jack.
Yeah, they there's a obviously with his mum saying is the second coming and whatnot. His dad does mention that she's been in and out of facilities, and at one point they mentioned the facility as the Santa Rosa um Mental Health Institute, which is the same one that we saw Charlie visiting in
Mm,
Numbers. So again, we've got some interconnectivity between the characters. And
yeah.
just, the episode being called Deus Ex Machina, I was like, what does that mean? Because I've heard it many times. And apparently, it is a plot device whereby a seemingly unsolvable problem in a story is suddenly or abruptly resolved by an unexpected, unlikely occurrence. And that's obviously exactly what we get here. This unsolvable problem of the hatch
Mm,
suddenly gets a little bit of progress after the unexpected event of somebody falling to their doom in a plane.
mm, yeah. Yeah, and I think as well, we've had this um, throughout the series, people have been in danger, and we've had, the Vision with Shannon getting killed. But in terms of main characters, there's not really been a huge amount of real, like, physical damage done to them. They've had wee bits and pieces done. We've had a few deaths, but it's been side characters. We've had the FBI agent. But so this feels like a bit of a turn for the show. And again, not having, this is years before things like Game of Thrones, and TV was happy. Not TV wasn't happy, that's maybe the wrong way, but your favourites and certainly main parts of the show weren't ever in that level of danger that Boone is in now and is in continuing into the next episode.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the, I think, looking across them, this is very much one of the episodes that is very much focused on story A, which is the Hatch, Locke,
Mm.
Boone. There is a B story, but the B story is, I think it's very much there to add a little bit of humor, and it's
Mm.
Sawyer's got headaches. Sawyer needs to see Jack. Jack, I think Jack knows immediately what's wrong with him, but it just takes the opportunity to kind of get Sawyer back for some of the jokes and whatnot that Sawyer's played. And then Sawyer needs glasses. And,
Mm.
thankfully, his prescription exists apparently in different lenses from different glasses. And there's this
Yeah.
like really like odd, we get this really weird montage of like Saeed sort of like soldering different glasses together to give to Sawyer so that he's got some glasses so he can keep his reading and stop getting his headaches. And
Yeah.
it's a very strange B story that doesn't really seem to add up to anything, but it's just, I guess, it's almost like we need something. We're like 5 minutes short on this episode, guys. Somebody give me something, and it's like, so I need glasses. It
Yeah.
just felt a bit weird when you think about what's happening in story A.
Mm. Yeah, and the side montage scene as well, there's very intense music playing behind it, as if it's this incredibly important thing. I mean, it is for Sawyer, and he does get his glasses despite his dislike, well, still dislike of Jack, and Jack's dislike of him, and they have a back and forward. And but then Jack admits near the end that he didn't really do it because Sawyer needed it. He did it because Kate asked. He did it for her. There's nothing really to do with Sawyer. But he could have probably, if Kate hadn't asked, he would have happily left him straining his eyes as he's reading everyone else's diaries from that have died in the plane crash. And yeah, it's fine. It's odd. It doesn't really. It gets starts and then it gets resolved. And as you said, it probably has been filler. That could have been filmed for any episode, for all we know. It was, and then they just chopped it in. That does serves a purpose, I suppose, to an extent.
Yeah, I guess it kind of reminds you that there is people, back at the caves and things, and that's obviously where
Mm.
Locke turns up, dumps Boone's body. It says that Boone fell from a cliff, which
Mm.
is about to become a very important lie, piece of information. And then Jack asks for more information, and as you said, Locke has disappeared into the night, and then we get into the second episode of Do No Harm, which picks up seconds later. And
Yeah.
suddenly we're not in Lost anymore. Suddenly we're in ER, which was obviously, ER was still very popular. It was coming towards the end of its run, I think, when Lost was starting, but ER had
Mhm.
been that ruler of primetime television for so long. And suddenly we're in ER territory, but just like island style, where we've got like Sun as a nurse and Kate's panicking and
Mm.
Jack's trying desperately to assess Boone's injuries, which are they're pretty grim injuries.
Mm. Yeah, he's first off. There's just straight away his lung collapses. Jack has to kind of poke a hole in his chest. He's I think it's a internal fracture on his right leg. He, as it goes on, he's coughing up blood. There's just not a lot going well for him. He needs a blood transfusion. Yeah, and Jack surmises from his injury to his leg that something landed on him. He didn't fall. This was so straight away. Jack and Locke are set for a standoff over the sort of lie that's been told early on. It's a very intense episode. It's um, Matthew Fox, I think, in the flashback as well, throws Jack in two different lights, shows him as, again, maybe being vulnerable in his flashback, and then being determined and kind of stoic, and maybe to his own detriment, not willing to accept what's kind of right there in front of him with Boone.
Yeah, and I think that's the theme that in the flashback as well, because he is about to be getting married. He's getting married to Claire from Modern Family.
Yeah.
Uh, and it turns out she is one of his former patients. She had,
Mm.
he did like spinal surgery on her and like helped her walk again. I'm not quite sure where that falls in like doctor patient boundaries.
Yeah.
But I think it's quite apparent that, and he even says it at one point, is he just marrying her because he saved her, sort of thing? And I definitely
Mm.
think that that is it. But because Jack is so determined that once he's made a decision, he's sticking with that decision, that he is about to kind of walk into a marriage that I don't think he particularly wants.
Mm. And it's never been something that's mentioned before as well. Like, we know about Jack's relationship with Christian, his father, and how that turned out. And we know that he, but we don't know about him kind of personal relationship wise. So the fact that he's not mentioned it doesn't seem as if it's maybe went well. Or maybe he's on the island now. Take the ring off and batter in. It's
I mean, considering the flirting he has been doing with Kate, if that marriage has lasted, then, well, it's not going to last if he ever gets off that island.
no, no. There's going to be a lot of questions from both of them, I suppose, with Kate side and things as well. Yeah, it's interesting that it's the first time this is really the first time at all that this has been brought up. I see Christian back again, and I know the flashbacks aren't really chronological from the last one you've seen, but it was a surprise to me seeing him again. I just assumed that this would have been post Australia, but as in for Christian. But then obviously it can't have been. I don't know why I thought that at the time. I went, but surely he's dead. But no, it's obviously a wee bit earlier, and Christian's still in his job, and he's still heavily drinking. First thing he does when he sits down is just takes the bottle off Jack and starts tanning it straight. But you know, and as you said, yeah, it feels like Jack's had to force himself even to get his vows. Claire from Modern Family. I think is it maybe Lucy or something. I can't remember. Is she's written her own vows and Jack's got a copy of them and he just can't do it. And it does come out of him organically on the day. Says I didn't save you, you saved me, which doesn't really tie in with his kind of conversation with Christian. Then the sort of night before the wedding, Christian says to him, I've got it written down, sorry. Commitment's what makes you tick. He's just not good at letting go. And again, mirroring what is happening on the island to him at that point.
And I think you're right in terms of the timeline with Jack's. I think everybody else's flashbacks, you've been able to kind of pinpoint roughly when it is. Like, that we know that Claire's thing with the baby takes her right up to getting on the plane. Same with Jin and Sun.
Mm.
Sawyer, we know, is kind of, recent. Kate's, we know, are quite far back, some of them, because she's been on the run and we know that she gets captured. And Jack's Locke's, we know, like, one of them was at least 4 years ago, and Walkabout was recent, but Jack's are really opaque, like all of them
Mm.
throughout. I don't quite know, like I can stitch together what we've seen of Kate and what we've seen of Locke and Sawyer and stuff into a rough timeline, but Jack's, I'm like, is this before even cowboys get daddy issues? Is it after? I'm not
Mm.
quite. It's trying to, like, I feel like it does come before all of that because the relationship between Jack and Christian isn't quite as volatile. But it is
Mm.
like this is its own. In addition to everything that's going on in the island, I've now got to piece together like everybody's flashbacks and timeline wise. Like I'm gonna need like when you were at school and you got given like pictures, you have to like cut them out and stick them into order. I feel like I'm gonna have to do that just to kind of follow where Jack's story actually goes and in what order.
Yeah. It feels like this could maybe be the start of Jack's story for us, as in this is the very start. From this is as far back as you'll see for him. This is at the beginning, because again, as you said, there's a certainly maybe a bit more respectful relationship with Christian, but also in those other flashbacks we have not seen or met or heard of any mention of a wife again. So it feels like maybe this is the show telling us this is Jack's starting point for you. We might see further back. There is every chance of that, but this felt like that to me. That this is maybe this is the bit where Jack becomes who he is now in the show.
Yeah. I mean, it's as flashbacks go, it's interesting, but
Mm,
it's not one that necessarily pushes too much forward because this is very much an episode that is about the island.
mm,
They just say we get Jack doing a transfusion. I love that Sun has become like his nurse, and at no point in any of Sun's history have we seen her look after anything other than that dog. It's like where she got this. We know that she's learned English. At the same time, was she also learning medicine? Because I don't know. I can't because she's very much been this sort of like pampered princess from what we've seen. Her dad has kept her in a very
mm,
comfortable life, so she knows all of the herbs to use for like when Sawyer's got his headaches in the previous episode. She knows which one to give
yeah,
him, and then Jack needs something like that's like a needle, and so she goes and catches the sea urchin. They get a lot of sea urchins on that island. Uh,
yeah. You think it would keep them sustained for a while, and I'm hoping it's not just like stereotypical writing. We have someone from the Far East, so they must know herbal medicine. But maybe we'll find out
yeah,
more of a backstory. Just like, oh, Asian person must know about like things like
yeah,
that. Find sea urchin because that's what they eat, isn't it? Like it could be. It's early noughties writing, but yeah. She's kind of the de facto nurse, and she's trying to keep Jack in a straight line on this, and tells him to take a breath. And but even with the same with the writing, well, I've said with the writing, sorry, that it's maybe is it stereotypical? It could be intentional because at one point Soon comes up with just like a big stick and says, "Give this to him," and he says, "Well, it's no time for herbal remedies." And what it always actually is because Jack's going to set Boone's leg, and she doesn't want him biting his own tongue off, so it's just to put in his mouth. So maybe there is a more of a background to Sun, and the writers know that it's going to have to get resolved in some way, shape, or form.
yeah. I mean, you have to admire the MacGyvering though of a blood transfusion done with the quill of a sea urchin and stuff. They could assume they had some tubing from somewhere. It's they
Yeah.
they were very lucky with the stuff that they had left over from that crash and that
Mm.
people thought to diligently pack in their cases. But then, as if this stress with trying to save Boone wasn't enough. Meanwhile, on the other part of the island, Claire is going into labour. Kate gets sent to get alcohol from Sawyer to help with Boone. Um,
Mm.
and on her way back, she hears Claire, who is basically like, "Do not perceive me. I am not having this baby. If you don't perceive me, it is not happening." But no, we are getting that baby on this island, and obviously we have this one life hangs in the balance where they may or may not die, and then we have a new life on its way, which is, I guess, it's all about addressing a balance, within the island. But I mean, when it rains, it pours. I mean, they've only got one doctor, and what's he going to do?
Yeah. Yeah, and it does show though, I think, certainly the scene with Claire and the scene with Boone as well, that when they really have to, the islanders are able to come together. You know, uh, Eight goes to Sawyer and is like, "Give me all your booze." Usually he would just be like, "Fuck, no, get what have you got for me?" But he's straight away, obviously she tells him what's happened, and he's like, "Okay, here you go. That's all I've got. Do you need me to help?" Um, the scene with Kate and Claire, Kate's fell and smashed some of the alcohol as well. So, but what she does is shouting for help, and then even Jin starts getting involved. I think maybe 5, 10 episodes ago, Jin would have heard that and just kept himself to himself. But he's becoming ingrained into the camp and into the survivors. He does seem he's still a standoffish with Sun when he goes to kind of he goes to like, inform Jack about Claire going into labour, and when Sun starts translating, he takes a minute. He sort of stops himself from replying before eventually, just kind of succumbing to it and saying, "No, I need to do this." So he's still got a bit of his past in him there, but he's becoming more open to being an islander. And could be his relationship with Michael's helped with that as well. Building the raft in the background, and maybe not as he's maybe not as fiery as he was before. Now that he's got a task at hand, sort of thing.
Yeah. I am not as anti-Jin as I was when I started the series. He's
Yeah.
making inroads.
Mm,
And obviously, as luck would have it, Charlie happens to be around Boone at that point. He has Claire, and so Jin and Charlie are tested. I love how succinctly Jack basically gives. I don't know how many years it is for people studying midwifery, but Jack kind of gives the bullet points of, so Kate's gonna, she's got to push until the head, slowly, and then she's got to really push, and then just clear the mouth and eyes, and yeah, Bob's your uncle, you've got a baby. And it's like, I
yeah.
don't really remember it
No.
being that easy. But they manage it. Charlie and Jin go back, and with some encouragement from Kate, because she's panicking, she's in labor, she's on an island in labor. I mean, labor is terrifying as it is, let alone an
Mm,
island, and the doctor is busy. um I would be a little bit apprehensive, but then also Claire's got this anxiety where she thinks the baby's going to know that she at some point didn't want it.
mm.
But then kind of Kate sort of talks her down, and Kate and Claire manage to deliver this baby. Why kind of like Charlie and Jin do that like men in the waiting room sort of like thing of just kind of watching?
Hugging
It's
each
like,
other.
yeah, it's like can Kate have a little bit of help? I mean, normally in a delivery suite, there's more than one person helping that baby come out. But no, they're kind of like Charlie's kind of been positioned into that father
Mm,
figure. So he's like the anxious dad waiting outside. And yeah,
yeah.
it's a really like happy moment in the island because everybody's been scared about this baby. And, Claire sort of confesses to Jin. I mean, the Korean man who can't understand her, the fears that she has about what if the others have done something to my baby, and what if he
Mm,
comes out, and he's not, what he's supposed to be. But it's a really nice sort of bonding moment, I think, between these four, and it definitely will, I think, help Jin
mm,
sort of ingratiate himself a little bit more into the group.
yeah. I remember how terrible I was in the delivery room. So the guy thing, it's just we stand out the way and just look at each other and then hug. That's it. It's just that's normal. But there was more professionals there at that point. I would hasten to add, like I wasn't just leaving Shanti herself. Um, but yeah, it is a nice moment. Claire has her baby boy, seems healthy. And I suppose now the worry for her will be, well, before when Ethan took her, at least she could act. She's always going to be protective, but she could protect them sort of by proxy by protecting herself. Now the others don't need to bring her along. Is it going to be easier for them to take the wee one? There's no immune system in a child like at that age, so it needs built up, and and there's polar bears. I mean, I
Yeah.
think I read something the other day that polar bears are one of the only animals that see humans as prey. So what's easier than a baby that can't run? But that's for further down the road. At this moment in time, it's a happy moment and probably a relief, but a bit of relief for her as well. Now that it's kind of all over.
Meanwhile, back at triage,
Mm,
it's not getting any better.
mm,
Jack realizes that Locke has given him the complete wrong information, and that Boone's leg is it's not just broken, it's dead. It needs to go. And so he calls for Michael, and they start hatching this plan to basically lop off his leg with part of the plane that they've got left over, I think it is. It's
Yeah,
like
I think it's the
some part of,
cargo. It's some cargo part, isn't
yeah.
it, where they would pull it down?
Which is very sharp and seems like it's lucky nobody's already lost an arm or a finger, because it comes down very quick. It goes straight
Mm,
through the tree branch that they put there. I mean, that really should be helping the raft construction. That would make things a lot easier than having to source stuff. Just keep lobbing that in there. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah,
very much.
they make the decision that Boone needs to lose his leg. Meanwhile, Shannon is nowhere to be seen because Saeed and Shannon have gone on their little date to a little quiet part of the island. They're having
Yeah.
a nice little romantic night away from camp, which is is always inevitable in these sorts of things when someone's life hangs in the balance. You know, the person closest to them is off doing something else that is inevitably going to be racked with guilt when they come back
Mm,
and find out what has transpired. So it really is building everything up to this isn't looking good for Boone. And then
yeah.
just before Jack goes to sever Boone's leg, he wakes up and he's like, no,
Yeah.
no, I'm done. And I think we've made a lot of comments about Boone over this, about him being this like golden retriever energy, and he wants to do well, but it always goes a bit wrong. But
Mm,
he does just want to help people, and we see it right down until he basically says, "Let me die," because you can take my leg, but how many drugs am I going to need? I mean, to be fair,
mm.
he should be going, "There's this plane full of heroin. If you could get that, I'll probably be all right."
Yeah.
But in
No,
this
yeah.
moment, he's doing this thing of being like, "No, I can feel it. It's over for me," and it's a
Mm,
very sort of, it's a very majestic sort of death scene. I feel.
yeah. He almost sort of goes out on his own terms as much as he can by saying, like, it's just going to cause him extra pain and he's probably going to die anyway. I think he must have had some sort of consciousness when Sun was saying that he's coughing up blood. There's blood inside him. This isn't good. Shit. Sun's trying to again keep Jack on the straight and narrow, talk him down, say why are you going to do this? And I think he must have picked up on some of that. And and he says, look, and because Jack, as we saw with when he was talking to Christian, you're no good at letting go. Jack had made a promise to Boone that you're not going to die. So Boone then says to him, "Look, I'm letting you off. You need to let me go. I'm finished. That I can feel the sort of end is nigh, and I would rather not be in agonising pain for the last few minutes." And there's a point where I think Soon says you can't do this, and Jack mirrors Locke by shouting at her, "Don't tell me what I can't do," which I found again really intriguing with the fact that the two of them are always opposite. They are, yeah, science and faith. But he says it in a way that Locke has said many a time already this series, almost like his catchphrase. Um, but yeah, and Jack basically waits with him until he does die, and he tries to get a word out for Shannon, tell Shannon, but he's not able to fully push through with it, unfortunately, and then he's gone.
I would love if his last line was like, "Tell Shannon she's a spoiled bitch," just because
Yeah.
she's had this whole thing. She's had this whole with Saeed where she's like, "Oh, Boone, yeah, he's not my real brother, but he's totally in love with me." Like, she's still
Yeah.
got some of that brattiness in it. She's trying to get rid of it. She's trying to start her new life on the island, but it's still there a little bit. She's still like, "Oh, by the way, Saeed, there is competition, so don't think that you're my only option." So I would love it if, like, there's got to be some sort of like, I remember like The Walking Dead, they used to like re-go over like bad lip reading of what the characters were saying. I'd love it if there was like someone where it was just like Boone just like ripping into Shannon, but obviously he was obviously probably saying that he loved her. But I think
Mm,
we sort of skipped over, there's a little bit earlier on where Boone gets consciousness and he
mm,
reveals the hatch to Jack, which I think is very important because now we've got somebody else on the island that knows that this hatch exists, which is going to cause trouble for Locke as more people come looking for this hatch.
mm. Yeah, this is where I think Jack finally clicked that Locke had been lying to him. Boone says the plane fell, so that's where he's kind of got his injuries and the hatch. Locke told me not to tell anyone about the hatch. And Jack is, I mean, maybe in that moment in time, it could be seen as blabbering a wee bit just through pain and disorientation, but Jack seems to take it on, and the I mean, the sort of the cliffhanger with this episode is Jack and Kate talking, and Jack saying, "Oh, Claire's got a healthy boy," but you can see him packing things up. Excuse me. And when Claire says, Boone died, we need to talk about it. He says he didn't die, he was murdered, and he's away to find John Locke. And that can't end well for Locke. I mean, as much as he is strong and there's a resilience, he's a fair whack older than Jack. So I think if Jack decides he's going to take him, it could be in for a bit of bother. But it's the fact that now, you're going to have people kind of converging on this hatch, and Jack's not going to keep it, because I think if it would fuck over if it fuck over Locke, then Jack will be more than happy to tell everyone, "Come on, let's go here," and just piss him off that wee bit more.
Yeah, because I do think that Jack still can't let go. And I think in Jack's head now that if Locke had said he was in this plane and it fell, and if he'd have known that Boone was crushed, I think Jack has got that doctor mentality of, well, I could have saved him then if I'd have known this. So I think he's
Mm,
still, even now, he's still not letting go of that. And it's like, well, it's not my fault because I was given the wrong information. If I had known the information, then I could have done this. And so therefore,
mm,
Locke needs to pay. So yeah, it's gonna be very interesting to see how those two play out. And I really enjoy the sort of like the last few minutes of this episode because we get that, well, I guess it's our first real extended Lost music, by Michael Giacchino. We get this big somber thing. We have the happiness of Claire coming out, and suddenly, like, we see all the other islanders that we don't normally see. Everyone's come to meet the baby. And
yeah.
then Shannon and Sawyer turn up, and then everyone looks sad, and then we see her with Boone's. But it's this really extended montage with this beautiful music playing, and I think this is the closest I think I've come so far to shedding a tear on this
Mm,
rewatch.
yeah. And it's played out really well, as you said. You've got that score from Michael Giacchino, and you don't need to be present for what Jack's saying to Shannon. You just see him approaching Shannon and breaking down, and then from a sort of wide shot, Shannon sort of stumbling a bit inside, looking panicked and confused, and then it cuts to Shannon sitting next to Boone's body, and again breaking down as well, and it's really beautifully done, I think, because I think a lesser show could have just had almost like the ER, as you said, just someone getting explained to them that their loved one's dead, and it wouldn't hit the same. You don't have that music behind it. It maybe wouldn't have the same impact, but it's really affecting. And just everything at the minute now, as you said, we're sort of puttling towards the end. It's all building into a crescendo. We've had our first major character death. Like I said, this didn't really happen a huge amount. No, I think Doctors died in here, but and it was never a show I watched. So for me, anyway, apart from maybe Buffy dying and coming back, I think at this
Well, she
point
came
it
back.
hadn't been. Yeah, but you didn't know that at the time. We didn't have adverts as much. No spoilers or anything for coming next season. Um, Maybe that would have been close to it, or Wesley and Something Angel. But having that sort of impactful death of a character who's had such a prominent role in the show already, as well as everything else that's happening with the hatch and a new baby, it just all feels like it's coming to one sort of big crescendo.
Mm. I will also say just like props to Ian Somerhalder for his acting throughout this episode because as
Mm,
Boone, he is just lay still and, we're told his lung collapsed and stuff. And I think he does a really good job at, conveying that labored breathing. He's just doing a lot of
mm,
wheezing and moaning and groaning and stuff. And I think that really helps sell that this guy is in a whole lot of pain. Dying on screen can be so cliche and so cheesy. And I think
yeah.
he does a really good job throughout the episode of showing his decline and then ultimately his death as well.
Hmm. Yeah, he's not hamming it up at all. It's very understated.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you said, the laboured breathing. He screams when he has to, when his legs getting reset. But then after that, it almost feels like maybe that's the point that takes too much out of him. and that's when he starts to properly go downhill. And even his sort of mini speech to Jack at the end, it's not played, but it's played for drama. It's dramatic, obviously, but it's not overly dramatized. It's very quiet and sort of introverted in the way he kind of comes across in that. And yeah, he's fantastic. Him and I think Matthew Fox in this episode, both of them do great work. We spoke about the flashback being what it is. It's okay, but Jack just being this sort of determined, at times manic portrayal for Matthew Fox as well, and this works well with the sort of balance of Ian Somerhalder as well.
Mm. I guess we should probably, do our first big life after Lost.
Mm.
So I mean, Ian Somerhalder did have a life before Lost. He
Yeah.
was he was actually I think he was actually the first person cast in Lost. He
Okay.
was the very first person. So it's kind of, I don't know, a bit sad that he was then
Yeah.
also the first one killed, which David Lindelof defended. He defended Boone's death, saying that Boone had to go because that was the critical turning point between Locke and Jack. You needed Boone's death
Okay.
in order
Yeah.
to that. The other people wouldn't quite have got the same response just purely because of how close Boone was to Locke and how Locke had sort of isolated Boone and stuff.
Mm.
But yeah, Ian Somerhalder, before Lost, he was in an ill-fated Dawson's Creek spin-off called Young Americans. Um, it was one of those ones that had like a backdoor pilot where Patey's old friend was going to private school and like turned up for like spring break and caused some
Right.
havoc for
Okay.
an episode. And then Young Americans was set within that private school where
Yeah.
Ian Somerhalder was the son of the principal. So again, very wealthy character. And then he had a 6 episode arc as Adam Knight on Smallville.
Okay. I can see him being in
In
Smallville. He's got that look.
Yeah. He was being experimented on by like Lex Luthor, and it was something to some sort of super soldier, or there was something to do with invisibility. But he was like one of Lana Lang's many suitors that something
Mm.
went drastically wrong with. And he was also in Rules of Attraction, um,
James
the
Vanderbeek.
the the film based on Bret Easton Ellis's novel,
Uh,
which he's fantastic in that. And then shortly after Lost, I think one of his first credits was the film Pulse, which it was part of that big band of American remakes of Japanese horrors. And whereas Pulse is seen as one of like the great J horrors, the remake was not one of the great ones. It was like him and Kristen Bell. Um, and yeah, it does.
Pulse,
It's
the
not
one about the
fantastic.
ghosts, is it? Is that the?
Yeah,
I've only seen it once. It's been years since I watched it, but I've never seen the remake. It's not something I was.
yeah.
It wasn't.
He was in a
Basically
film.
just Ring happened, and then
Yeah, exactly. Then everything got remade. And then he was in one called The Tournament, which is a British film to do with like a load of assassins. But
mm,
his big credit was The Vampire Diaries, where
mm,
he played Damon Salvatore. So but after Twilight, everyone wanted like vampire love triangles, and in Vampire Diaries, you got that. You had these two brothers, Damon and Stefan, fighting over the love of a mortal teenage girl called Elena, who happened to be the doppelganger of their maker, Catherine. Um,
okay,
he was the bad guy. He was like I'd say if we would compared it to Buffy, he would be the Spike. So like he
right,
comes in series one as like the bad guy, but then
mm,
he is the one who eventually goes on to have the stronger relationship with the lead character, and Stefan is very much the angel. And that show has, he got ridiculously famous off of that. He was also in another vampire show called V Wars, which was on Netflix, which He
Okay.
played like a doctor. I think we got like 3 or 4 episodes in and we gave up. And then
Uh,
Netflix also gave up, as they often do with their programs. And since then, he regularly appears at conventions where, because of the Vampire Diaries, he makes a lot of money. And then him and
nice.
his Vampire Diaries co-star Paul Wesley have gone into business, and they have a bourbon together. They are the Brothers Bourbon, which has been getting lots of awards. And if Ian's listening, I'm sure we'd quite happily, take a bottle and do a
Yeah,
review.
yeah.
I mean, why call it Brothers? Why call it Brothers Bourbon? Do Boone's Bourbon. Let's
Yeah.
get that out there.
Have their own. Yeah, they can have their own
So yeah,
offshoots. Just that's your brother's bourbon's your
exactly.
main one. He has a Boone one, and then the other guy, I've never seen Vampire Diaries. It wasn't really on my radar to watch it when I was.
It had vampires in, and I'm a sucker for like teen trash. So it spoke to me. But yeah, I think he was the first person cast in Lost, and then he was our first big character that departed Lost. But then
Mm,
he has then gone on from Lost and gone on to something where he's become even bigger. I think a lot
yeah,
of the people that we will discuss down the line, it will be life after Lost. They did this stuff, and then maybe they've kind of fizzled away a little bit, and they're kind of primarily known as Jack from Lost, for example,
yeah,
or
aye, aye,
Desmond from Lost, as we were talking about a lot with Jed in the previous episode. But
yeah.
Ian has left Boone behind and has kind of gone on to now be Damon from the Vampire Diaries, which I don't know if that's better or not. But yeah, that is it's quite a career trajectory for him. So it's nice to see that he continued to get work.
Mm, yeah. And if you're in a show like that, I seen it was it 2017 it finished, which is obviously 8 years ago now. But I knew of the Vampire Diaries when it was on, but I'd never watched it. But I thought for some reason I thought it finished a lot earlier than that. So he's got a good innings out of that. If he was in every episode, I'm unsure. Was he in it right to the end?
He was, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
there we go.
We're not
Yeah.
doing a Vampire Diaries rewatch, so I won't spoil what happens there for anybody listening and watching that hasn't seen it. But yes, he does survive to the
Last.
end.
Yeah. That was maybe written into his contract, like I can't die in series one. Please. It's happened to me once before, that's enough.
Yes. I mean, I think, it's safe to say that with the way that this island works, this probably isn't the last we've seen of Boone, but in
Mm,
terms of his storyline on the island, Boone is dead. Because obviously we've still got Shannon, so there's still going to be some of her flashbacks, which inevitably may feature Boone. So I don't think it's necessarily the last we've seen of him, but you
mm,
know, his chapter and his purpose has been served. It
yeah,
got that light on in that hatch. I mean, that's
yeah. It's
what
not a
a way
bad
to
one.
go.
But I mean, plus we also know the dead walk on the island, as we've seen with Jack's dad, so zombie Boone coming up soon.
Yeah, who knows? So yeah, I think that's, unless you've got anything else to add, I think that's probably
Yeah.
as we've exhausted Boone's demise. We've got 2 more episodes of All of Us Are Lost left in season 1.
Mm.
So we are getting to the pointy end. Please do follow along with us. Do give us a like rating wherever you are watching or listening to us, and tell your friends, get everybody hooked. I mean, I don't know about you, Andy, but my mum has tumbled back into the Lost wagon. She's not necessarily rewatching the show yet, but she is kind of rewatching it via this. So
Mm,
there's definitely still an appeal to this show. So yeah, please do join us and get your friends involved too.
mhm. And yeah, as you said, we are coming towards the end, thick and fast. Next up, we've got The Greater Good, a very side heavy one, side flashbacks all round, and Born to Run, where we finally find out about that toy aeroplane from Kate.